Redraft. So it's kind of a rainy day and all that wonderful stuff here. So might as well do a redraft on this kind of gray day that's going on around me. And we're gonna do 2006. So the 2006 entry draft where Eric Johnson goes number one overall. And yeah, let's go ahead and review who went where. Jordan Stahl number two, Jonathan Taves number three, Nick Backstrom number four, Phil Kessel number five, Derek Brassard number six, Okposo goes seventh. Peter Mueller goes eighth. James Shepard at ninth. So, your first misses are likely Mueller and Shepard. Outside of that, pretty good picks from there. Frolik then goes to Florida. Jonathan Bernier to LA. Brian Little to the Atlanta Thrashers. I don't have the logo, but I figured Winnipeg works because he's still in Winnipeg, right? Toronto to Yuri Talusti. Michael Grabner to Vancouver. Rico Helenius to Tampa. One game played for Helenius in the NHL. He is the first one on the board who's played less than 297 games because Mueller was the least before that. Ty Wishart, 26 games played. He was a San Jose pick. Trevor Lewis, Chris Stewart. Mark Matera is the first one on the board with 0 games played. David Fisher is another one with 0 games played. Bobby Sanguinetti, 45 games played in his career. And he was seen as a guy who just couldn't catch a break at the NHL level. Pretty darn good at the American Hockey League level, just couldn't get a break at the NHL level. Thus the 45 games played. Claude Giroux, pretty good pick that Bobby Clark couldn't pronounce when he got up there. Semyon Varlamov. Clark was mad, though, at the time. Semyon Varlamov, the future starter for the Washington Capitals, who, of course, has moved a couple of times since then. Dennis Persson, no games played for him, drafted by Buffalo. Patrick Berglund, who ended up in Buffalo and then retired. 717 games played before he did that. Leland Irving, the reason I'm wearing this Calgary jersey, because, yeah, I wanted Irving to make it. I was like, come on, let's see Irving do it. And no. Ivan Vishnevsky, 5 games played for him in his NHL career. Nick Foligno, absolute steal late in that first round for Ottawa. Or you could argue that teams ahead of Ottawa just didn't see in Foligno what the Ottawa Senators did. Chris Summers, who played 70 games, drafted by Arizona, and then Matt Correnti, drafted the last draft pick of the first round in 2006 for New Jersey, and of course he played 34 games in his career. So the top row here is pretty darn good. Now, there are a few who sit outside of the first round who are pretty good picks and end up getting in because if I'm going to redraft, I'm not just using the first round for this one because there's too many misses. There are too many guys who've played nothing, 0. So Persson, Matera, Fisher, and then you've got Helenius with 1 game, Vishnevsky with 5. By the time I get to the end of that first round, it's just you're running on fumes. So I'm again with the book, and I'm allowing myself players outside the first round. Feel free to let me know in the comment section below how wrong I may be and who I'm disrespecting or overvaluating, because that's how that works. Whoever's overvalued, let me know. The number 1 draft pick to St. Louis, I'm going with not their number 1 draft pick, not Eric Johnson. I'm going with Claude Giroux. So to prevent Bobby Clark from having to try to pronounce the name, I'm having St. Louis do it first. Giroux was a pretty good pick. Pretty good pick by Philadelphia. And I think of that draft class, he's probably the best player. Now, going to Pittsburgh at 2, this is kind of sacrilegious, of course. But it's the best player in the draft. So I have Pittsburgh, instead of Jordan Stahl, they're taking Nicholas Backstrom. How does that work? Then you'd have Malkin, Crosby, Backstrom. I don't have a clue how that works. And again, you could make the argument of, well, that's why you draft Stahl, because Stahl is a complementary role player. I would argue you take the best player available, you take Backstrom, and who knows what you might be able to trade for with one of those 3 centers being available. And I'm going to go ahead and throw a spoiler out there. Sid's not the one that would have been available. But still, Backstrom, absolutely fantastic. I can't have him lower than 2. At 3, well, it's going to have to be Taves, right? I mean, it would be absolutely disrespectful to Taves and to that 3 cups that the Hawks won, in large part because of Taves and Kane, not to have Taves still taken by Chicago. So when I did the 2007 draft, Kane was still was still drafted by Chicago, and in this case, Jonathan Toews still goes to Chicago. So those are your top 3 picks. Now at 4, at 4, this is not one that people are going to be happy about. But you know what? He goes to the Capitals. Can you imagine? You imagine Brad Marchand jumping up from 71st overall to the number 4 spot for the Washington Capitals. You could have Marchand and Wilson out there, and there are numerous other agitators. Hathaway. You could have a line of Hathaway, Marchand, and Wilson. I don't know who's going to play in the middle of that line. Just imagine the 3 of them on the ice at the same time. Yeah, just imagine the 3 of them out there together. That would frighten everybody, myself included. So at number 5, and honestly, this is a weird one, but I can't pass on Phil Kessel. Kessel, it just didn't click in Boston. Once he got to Toronto, his game, I think, improved greatly. Although there was more expected of him in Toronto than I think he could have provided. And then he went to Pittsburgh, and of course he won the back-to-back Stanley Cups. I can't see Boston passing on Kessel, even though Kessel didn't work out in Boston. So I still have Phil Kessel going 5th overall. At 6th overall, I have an underrated or overrated forward, depending on what you expect from him. And I have Columbus picking Jordan Staal. Staal, very, very good player, good center. I think that sometimes he's been relied upon to do too much in Carolina. I think there were times as well in Pittsburgh where he was capable of an expanded role that he didn't get. So I'm going to split the difference, and I'm going to have Jordan Staal drafted by Columbus. Because sure. Which means that Columbus's current most notable player among their forwards anyways, most recognizable, one of the most personable as well, Nick Foligno, drops to 7th, or doesn't drop. He ends up at 7th, going to the New York Islanders. So instead of Columbus drafting him, they draft Jordan Staal. Now, if you want to make the argument for Foligno over Staal, by all means, go for it. I think they're close. I do. I think they're very close. I think you can make an argument for either of them. At number 8, I'm going to go with the first goaltender going to Arizona, and just debating how much that might have changed their fortunes going forward. Semyon Varlamov. Varlamov going to Arizona rather than right here for the Capitals. And how did the Capitals do in that draft? Backstrom and Varlamov. Not too shabby. But Varlamov, excellent starting goaltender at times. He has had his struggles as well. I do understand that in his time in Washington, his time in Colorado, he did have his struggles along the way. But overall, pretty good all-around number 1 goaltender. And I can't have him dropping any further than that. Which brings me to the second row. And starting off the second row is the guy who started off the first row when they had the original draft. And that's Erik Johnson. So Erik Johnson to Minnesota instead of James Sheppard. I'm going to go ahead and say that's a bit of an upgrade over what they had with Sheppard. And I liked Sheppard, but yeah, I would take Johnson over Sheppard. And this draft overall pretty darn good. So I have Johnson going there. And from there it gets kind of murky. Because again, at that point then you're into, well, opinion-wise, where would you have everybody? Well, based on his peak. Based on his overall peak, I know his current contract isn't very good, but I have Milan Lucic going to Florida. Now, could you argue Lucic's career ahead of Johnson's? Maybe. I think Johnson's taken more criticism than necessary at times, but I can't have Lucic further down. Just in games played, he has played a ton of hockey. When you play that physical style, when you are a power forward, it does take its toll. And so, yeah, Lucic for me jumps right up to the number 10 spot from 50, where he's originally drafted. So this shows how well Boston drafted in 2006. Marchand moves up here, wasn't a first-round pick, and Lucic moves up here. Boston drafted Kessel. So they got Kessel, Marchand, and Lucic all in the same draft. That's not too shabby at all. Next up, Yeah. To LA. To LA, I'll send them Derek Brassard. So Brassard drops from the Columbus pick down to LA's, but I'm fine with him being taken there. Brassard, it's been middling results, right? He was okay and he's good. And he's never quite reached the heights that was expected when he was drafted where he was, but he's still been a pretty good player. So I still have him in the first round, and still relatively early in the first round, not as early as he was originally, but still pretty early. So next up, going to what was Atlanta, what is now Winnipeg, I'm going to have them draft Jeff Petrie. Petrie also falls into that category, guys who are sometimes underrated, sometimes overrated. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Petrie, good defenseman, very good for Montreal this year, and I can't see him slipping further than that. Of course, he was originally drafted 45th overall. So Petrie comes off the board next. Next up, I'm going to I'll have Toronto take Kyle Okposo. Okposo is another guy he's on a bad contract, right? So Okposo is the second guy drafted here who's on a bad contract. Lucic is the other one. And the contracts, I think, make them look less useful than they are. Maybe like there's more expectation on them because of the money they make, which is fine. That's part and parcel of what happens. But I still think Okposo gets taken here by Toronto. Just over the length of his career, he's been pretty good. And I think Okposo would have been a good fit for Toronto. Toulousti's not going to be taken in the first round in this redraft. I'm just throwing that out there before people ask. Yeah, I don't see Toulousti as being first round in this one. Next up, going to Vancouver. I'm tempted to take Grabner here, but I'm going to say that Atlanta kind of got it right with Brian Little. Brian Little's been injured most of this year. When he was in the lineup, he was very good for Winnipeg. And I do think Little takes more criticism than is warranted. I think he's a useful player. Would he be better suited to being a third-line center? Probably. But I don't hold it against him that Winnipeg has him on the second line when maybe he should be on the third. But also they've tried replacing him and it's failed twice. So both Stastny and Hayes, it was middling results at best. So the attempts to replace him haven't worked out all that well. I say, why not just leave it, give it to him, give him that chance, because they seem to play better with him in the lineup as well. Going to Tampa next, I'm going to give them. Yeah, I'm going to go off the board with this one, as in another draft pick that wasn't taken in the first round. I'll have Artem Anisimov, who was drafted 54th overall that year. I'll have him taken by Tampa. Anisimov's a good forward, and I consider him to be somewhat underrated as well. But there's going to be a lot of that on this board from here. Again, that top row, there's some excellent talent there. There's some good talent here, and then as it goes further down, that's sort of how these drafts work. So going next, and again over the length of his career. Michael Grabner is pure speed. Absolute pure speed. And he's got the goal scoring finesse as well. And shorthanded, he's pretty good. He's had enough hot streaks and enough good seasons that I'm still going to have him drafted here. I do think that Canuck fans complained way too much when he made it with the Islanders, because I didn't see an opening on the Canucks roster where I thought he would fit, where he would have scored those goals in Vancouver. I felt it was one of those situations where he found the perfect team for him, and if he had stayed in Vancouver, he doesn't score that much. So I have Michael Grabner there, and then next on the list, I'm going to have, going to LA, another Michael Frolik, who is not a top 6 forward, but he's a decent top 9 forward. And again, I see Frolik as a guy who's had a nice long career. And I can't see him falling much further than that on this redraft. I just can't see it. Next on the board, I'm going to go with another goaltender. Jonathan Bernier. So Bernier was drafted by LA here. Doesn't really get much of a chance in LA because there's that Jonathan Quick guy. He's pretty good. And he ends up going to Toronto and playing behind some sketchy defenses. His numbers are not necessarily fantastic. You look at what he did this year in Detroit, honestly, he has not been the problem in Detroit. Goaltending in general, as long as it's not Jimmy Howard, hasn't been a huge issue for Detroit. I say that, and yet Calvin Pickard's numbers weren't very good either. And I think that just amplifies just how important Bernier's been. And I think if you're Yzerman, you hold on to Bernier next year and just give him the starter's job for now. You know you're not going to make the playoffs, and he gives you a chance to win. His record actually wasn't that bad. So for people who think maybe Detroit intentionally tanked, you can look at the record of Jimmy Howard and how many games he started and maybe find a correlation there. For Anaheim, so they're not going to draft Mark Matera, spoiler alert. I'm going to have them draft. I know he's retired now, but Berglund wasn't bad. Patrick Berglund had his moments. So Berglund actually moves up in this draft. And I wouldn't rule out Berglund for a comeback at some point, just from how he retired and from what's come out after and some of the battles he was having internally. He can get that all straightened out. I don't see any reason he can't come back and give the NHL another shot. Not necessarily in Buffalo, sure. But, Berglund, his heart just wasn't in it. And if he can find that spark again, maybe he comes back. But I can't drop him further on this list than that. Next up, currently playing, going to Montreal, I should say. Minnesota was right there, so he's not going to Minnesota. Now, you may be able to say, well, Matthew Perreault is still playing, so how in the world can you have Matthew Perreault after Berglund, who's not? Fair enough. Swap Berglund and Perreault. Matthew Perreault, good player. Again, once you get into this part of the draft, you're going to have players you could probably move around. Like I said, if you want Berglund after Perreault, go for it. I think Berglund's been a better goal scorer. I think the unfortunate ending in Buffalo was just that, unfortunate. And I can't really penalize him too much for that. But, I'm going to take Perreault at that point. Next up, going to the New York Rangers. One of the best names in the NHL. Cal Clutterbuck. Who was drafted 72nd overall. So that was a pretty good draft for 71st and 72nd. You get Marchand and Clutterbuck. Clutterbuck to the Rangers. So this is your 6 players who were drafted outside the first round that have made it into the first round. That's not too bad. I'm pretty sure there's been other drafts that you could probably see a worse first round overall. And I'm thinking of 99 and 2000, but those were just shallow drafts anyways. 99 for sure. So we're past Clutterbuck now. And next on the board, Chris Stewart. Chris Stewart, who was a first-round pick of Colorado. He stays in the first round. He falls to Philadelphia, which is where he's currently employed. So that works out. Stewart, all the potential in the world, and numerous teams took a chance on him realizing that potential. It just didn't click. And whatever the reason is for it, it just didn't happen for him. So, to me, I have Stewart at that point. Again, you guys want to have that debate? We can have that debate. Because next on the list, going to the LA Kings, I'm having Trevor Lewis. Trevor Lewis, who was taken by the Kings here, instead falls to the Capitals. And again, from Berglund to Lewis, the arguments can be made for any of those guys being taken first or potentially being taken last. So, Lewis, good, solid support player for the LA Kings. I don't really have anything. It's not that I have anything bad to say about him. It's just Stewart did have a couple really good offensive seasons in the NHL. Clutterbuck is a physical presence. That can't really be in any debate. There can't be any debate about that, I should say. Perot, I like Perot. Again, Berglund, just sidelined by himself. And that's, so again, I've got Lewis at that point. So we'll check that off. So next up is we're down to the last 7. Let me just do a little quick count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Da-da-da. All right, so did a quick check to count off everybody and make sure I've got the exact right number. Going to Buffalo next. I'm going to have them take James Reimer, who was originally drafted 99th overall in 2006. So I have Reimer going to Buffalo Sabres. And again, if you want to argue, well, Reimer's been pretty good. He belongs higher up. Go on ahead. For me, Reimer, there's been some down points there, and disappointments, and just he hasn't quite been able to snag that starting job and keep that. I do think career-wise, I would have Bernier ahead of Reimer, but again, and they were both together in Toronto, right? And then next up off the board, to St. Louis, I'm going to have another goaltender. Steve Mason, who was drafted 69th overall. And going to St. Louis would mean that he doesn't have that run with Columbus. And he got Columbus to the playoffs in 2009 in a very, very memorable rookie season. Pretty solid and a decent enough all-around goaltender after that. Just for me, again, I'd have him after Reimer, I'd have him after Bernier, and these guys in between. Next one off the board. I would have Leo Komarov, who was drafted 180th overall that year, going to Calgary. So instead of Leland Irving going to the Flames, I'd have Komarov going. Next one off the board, to Dallas. I have them taking Jamie McGinn, who originally went 36th overall. Yep, that's fine. And then for the last 3, to Ottawa, a career cut short. Derek Dorsett, who of course was on a pretty good little tear for the Vancouver Canucks, and then his career was cut short. And honestly, he was a good overall player. He was. He's known for the fisticuffs mostly, but he did have some offensive side to his game, and he could play a regular shift. So that says a lot right there. And with the last 2, going to Arizona, Nikolai Kulemin, who was drafted 44th overall, goes to Arizona. And then going to New Jersey with that last pick in the first round, I have them taking Sean Mathias, who originally went to Detroit at 47th overall. So the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7... the last 7 picks are outside of the first round. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 overall of them are outside the first round. So there you go. The 2006 NHL entry draft, redrafted. And again, I'm not doing these every week. I'm trying to, pace them out and stretch them out a little bit. And it's kind of a fun thing to look at. And again, there's no science to this. So if you guys have a different opinion, by all means, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.